Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's live webinar titled Rebranding Redefined, Design to Flex. My name is Chris Hannum. I'm on the marketing team at Frontify. One small programming note, if you were paying attention to the ads and the landing page, you would have seen that our VP of Marketing, Diggy Zetterberg, was originally set to moderate today's session, but I'm subbing in, so I hope that's okay with everyone. We are indeed live. It's 10 a.m. here in New York, where I am. We have people registered from all over the world joining us. So wherever you're joining us from, welcome. Thank you so much for making time for us. Before we get to our great speakers, I want to run through just two agenda items. As you can see around this frame here, we're using Zoom for this webinar. It's your typical webinar setup. We have a chat tab. If you have any issues, like you can't hear something or you can't see a slide, let us know. There's also a Q&A tab. Please put your questions in there. We have great guests, very knowledgeable people. So submit your questions and we'll get to them throughout the conversation. And lastly, people always ask this question. Yes, we're going to record this session and we will share it with you afterwards. Now, the second agenda item I want to get through here, I just want to share some context about today's webinar. It's the fourth of 6 episodes in our Rebranding Redefined series. And I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Anna Benzel. She's the conductor of this series. She's behind the scenes right now, monitoring all your questions and chats. So thank you, Anna, for making today's session happen. The goal of this series is we want to bring really smart people together to discuss key elements of rebranding that are going to shape the future of branding and design. And I think today's topic, Design to Flex, is a perfect example of this. We know rebranding isn't just about a new color or logo. It's more and more about building these, brand systems that are designed to flex across platforms, channels, cultural contexts, you name it. So today, let's discuss this shift from static to flexible brand identities. Let's ask, or think about what does this mean for creative control and brand control, creative freedom? How do flexible systems enhance or undermine brand recognition? What should stay fixed in a rebrand and what can shift? Where does strategy end and chaos begin? We'll get into all these questions and plenty more. And I truly, truly, truly cannot think of better people to speak about the role of flexible brand elements than today's guest. So we're going to get started. First up, we have Amy Bebbington, Global Head of Brand at Mozilla. Amy, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And then next up, we have two folks from a global branding agency of the absolute highest esteem, Jones Knowles, Ritchie, or JKR. We have Carolyn Griffin, Group Strategy Director, and Luke Thompson, Creative Director. Carolyn and Luke, welcome.
Great to be here.
And so to get started here, I'm going to hand it over to Luke and Carolyn. They have something that they'll walk us through, and I think it's the perfect way to get started to inspire us and get us in the right frame of mind for today's topic. So Luke and Carolyn, please take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, really excited to get into all those topics and talk a little bit about how Mozilla's brand system is designed to fix and flex. But before we get into that, I just wanted to share a little bit of context. So we're going to introduce you to the brand, show you a bit of the rebrand, and show you a little bit of that fix and flex system, just so when we're talking, it's clear what we're talking about. So I will get straight into it.
Awesome. So that's just a little bit of a preview and a roundup of where the Mozilla identity landed. But really, we wanted to come back to where we started. When we started working together, Mozilla and JKR, brand equity for Mozilla was low. The identity hadn't kept up with the times. And as you can see here, there was a lot of inconsistency. So we saw an opportunity to connect with new audiences, tell a clearer story, and really draw people into the Mozilla ecosystem. You might be aware of Firefox, but there's so much more to this world that we really needed to tell that story.
And now our new brand ecosystem is really designed to flex across all of the different audiences and purposes of the brand. So really going from that system before of government to grassroots, we have an identity that really can speak to those different audiences while still remaining distinctive. So as you can see here on the left, we have how we show up in our sort of more serious environments like governments and changing laws and advocating and things like that, through to on the right when we are showing up for the grassroots, when we're talking more to our sort of core users and to those activists. We visually shift to kind of represent those different people. So just very quickly, we have a really core set of assets that in government, we look like this. We're a little bit more pared back, and it's deliberately much more simple and information-led. You can see how that comes to life in reports, social and experiences. To grassroots, where we're much more flexible. And when we talk to grassroots coders, people who are developing tools to empower our users, events like Mozilla Festival, things like our Distilled blog and IRL podcast. We have these flexible assets, which are built from that same kind of seed of the core fixed assets, but have that ability to flex and become more deliberately expressive and vibrant and fun. And you can see how that starts to come to life in content and events. So yeah, just a really quick overview. We have a bespoke set of assets that work together as a coherent and distinctive system, fixed and flexible, to be able to go from more simple and more to more expressive depending on our audience. So just a quick little intro there to set us up so we can all see what we're talking about.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you, Luke and Karen. That's awesome. The video is great, and to see the little bit of the backstory is really, I love looking at the concepts there and the thinking that goes into it. If you have any questions in the audience about anything you saw in the video and that initial thing, let's throw them in. But for now, I think I want to just ask, why choose this flexible system in the first place?
I can jump in here. I mean, I think Mozilla is such a powerful organization, and that there's just not enough awareness, and there wasn't enough awareness of the strengths that they bring, and they needed to be relevant, right? They're speaking to so many different types of people, a wide breadth from coders and developers to advocates to change makers, really getting in front of government as well as everyday users. They also needed to be true to who they were, right? Mozilla was there for essentially the founding of the internet and has really actively shaped it, and it needed to be true to kind of that heritage and that history and that DNA, as well as cohesive, really telling a connected story. And with all these different audiences, with all this rich history, there was no way we could really take a one size fits all approach.
Nice. You also mentioned this fixed, flexed, free framework. Can you explain, just go a little bit more into how you applied it specifically to this project?
Sure. I mean, I think that when we think about fixed assets, fixed is all about those core, hardworking, everyday assets that you can build that recognition around. So what Luke shared on the screen, it's like it's more reduced and essential. These are the things where you might cover up the Mozilla logo, but people can still recognize and feel that it's unmistakably us. We think about defining those core fixed assets so that way we kind of have this foundation. And then we build in more flexibility. So that's when we need to be more timely, or more kind of reactive, right? When we're thinking about different channels or different audiences. So for Mozilla, when they're speaking to more grassroots, when they're speaking to more specific users, for example, ones that are more interested in privacy, we need to have that sense of flexibility. Or when we need to go to an event and be as loud as and expressive as possible, that's where flexibility comes in. And free is really the fullest extension of that. So with every brand, the way that they might be fixed and flexed might shift, but we really think about that model overall as the way that we approach branding and how you build distinction over time.
Gotcha. Amy, what about on your side, or Luke, anything else to add around why you chose the flexible system, or just how this framework was applied across these
Yeah,
different?
I can hop in. I can hop in here. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges we have at Mozilla is our portfolio is so broad. We have consumer products like Firefox, for example, right through to, businesses within our organization, like the ads business, the responsible ads business. So flexibility was essential for us. Like to Carolyn's point, one size wouldn't fit all. We needed a way to not only have flex across the breadth of our portfolio, but also flex to our audience. So, having a fixed, flexible, and free system is really supportive of the needs of our organization.
That audience piece, especially, I think, in terms of Mozilla, was just so important, and that really became the cornerstone of how we built this system. So, government to grassroots, very, very clearly signposts. On this side, we're talking about big changes to the law. We're talking to, very high power, potentially like legal people who don't necessarily understand the culture of the internet, and that we need to inform them and seem very serious and credible. And then on the other hand, you've got activists, coders, people who are getting involved because they love the internet. And for those people, you need to be a lot more fun. You need to be a lot more sort of inclusive and bring people along. So it's not only the portfolio, but it's also the really wide range of audiences, and the fact that you've got these two audiences who have a common interest, but they're very, very different in how they approach that. So we really wanted to kind of create an identity that does justice to both of those groups.
Great. Nice. So I'm thinking this is all great. I'm on board. I think this is awesome. I think we're all in these, you have the strategy. Okay, this is it. But like, how do you actually handle the handoff of this flexible system to this community that is so broad and decentralized of different contributors and teams?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially with an organization that is this large and touches this many people, the kind of socializing of those elements is really, really important. So we had an amazing democratic process internally. JKR and Mozilla, we worked hand in hand, like building that identity, and we worked with a really big internal team, worked together to kind of bring people along on that journey. And then when we were ready, we made sure that new rebrand, not just the elements, but the reasons for them, was really clearly communicated. So I think it was as part of MozFest, or as part of one of Mozilla's constant sort of stream of events. We had a live stream where we presented the initial rebrand to Mozillians. We had drop-in sessions where people could come and see through the guidelines and kind of learn the reasonings behind the system, but how to apply the system. And then, of course, behind all that, there's just the need for, I think, the standard thing that any brand needs, which is a really solid set of guidelines and a great set of examples. So when it came to those examples, again, the kind of democratic and the working together was really, really important, where some of the examples were more sort of speculative and future facing that we built. But we also worked really closely with the Mozilla design team and with other partners to develop those first few projects and event identities using our new overall identity. So really the collaboration is super, super important. First of all, for us to fully understand what it is that Mozilla needs, but then secondly, to make sure that JKR and Mozilla are presenting a united front and explaining the identity to everyone in a way that makes sense for people, and in a way that hopefully people buy into and love. Because if people don't love it, they're not going to buy into it, and it will just die a death when you're working with an organization that's as open and democratic as Mozilla is.
Yeah, I'll just add to that a little bit, because Luke, you're right. And I think for us, giving the organization confidence in the system that we were building was really important. And in order to get that confidence, we needed to make sure we brought everyone in really early. And that's like teams that are working within the organization, but also our broader community outside Mozilla as well. So it really was quite a complex kind of matrix of stakeholder management to navigate this entire journey. But it was really important because it meant that actually we had some kind of endorsement and support to the system as we kind of developed it. So we really balanced this kind of like informing, sharing with, like gaining feedback and building on that feedback and then resharing back to people. So it really became quite a cycle of collaboration, really. It was a good process, and appreciate JKR for sticking with us through that.
Yeah, likewise. I was going to say, as an agency, you have to have a partner on the brand side who understands, who gets it, who you can collaborate directly with, and it's then almost their job and your job to work together to make sure that everyone's brought along on the journey. So that's like a really, really important thing. And I think Amy and her team were so key to making sure that we understood their needs, but then also making sure that people within Mozilla were brought on that journey.
That's great. And I know this idea of like communication, collaboration, getting people to adopt and buy in. I know it's a challenge. So if you have questions about your specific company, a challenge with this, feel free to throw it in. We did get one right now. It might be specific. I'll see. This is from anonymous attendee. You can write anonymous question. That's fine. But it's kind of tied to this and maybe more at a very tangible level. But so what software applications did you need to be able to help you offer this Flex system? For example, for us, we have a brand team and a UX team and the devs. Is there anything that can help us bring the different goals for these three departments together?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know if there's anything super unexpected here. I know that a lot of our designers who come from a brand background, they're quite used to working in Illustrator. And what we found was through the process, we were more and more making those designers work in Figma so that we're kind of talking the same language as people on Mozilla side. I think maybe you guys were a bit ahead of us in terms of adopting that across all levels of design. So that was a big one. And then additionally, it was quite a patchwork in terms of feedback, to be honest. Like we were sharing Slack channels, we were sharing documents and annotating them and all of that stuff to sort of keep the communication going. I think the key thing is really just making sure you're in the same place. So for us, it was Mozilla is in Figma. That's where they're doing their feedback. So that's where we'll need to move into. Whereas I think at the beginning, we were almost in these slightly separate silos, which would have made it quite challenging. So for me, I think it's more about sharing tools than necessarily making sure it's a specific tool.
Yeah. Gotcha. Anyone else add? Otherwise, I have one more question here for this section of the questions here. And I think, this is such a huge undertaking. The end result looks amazing. And I really love all the little details that went into everything. It's really, really cool. And I think Mozilla is a beloved brand anyways, but obviously there were challenges along the way. So I'm just curious if you could all share, the biggest challenges in making Mozilla's identity both culturally responsive and technically scalable. Because you have everything from these advocacy campaigns to like the browser UI. So what biggest challenge?
I'm sure I think Amy can probably speak to this in more depth than me, but from our side, Mozilla's accessibility standards are just absolutely next level. I've never worked with anyone who would hold us to as high a standard as Mozilla in terms of making sure that the identity is usable by absolutely everyone. So we worked with Purple Tuesday to help kind of analyze our colors and our typography in particular. And we actually had to make like quite a lot of changes to meet those needs, to be honest. We had this big process where we had a bunch of bright colors that we were really excited about. And we basically got told in no uncertain terms, no, you can't do that because it will hurt certain people's eyes. So, and the same with the typography, where we had to go through a massive process of ensuring that it was really, really legible for people. So the accessibility in terms of unique challenges for Mozilla was a really interesting and really useful process to go through.
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit. Like Luke's right. We take responsibility for accessibility really seriously, and I think that showed through the process. We wanted to build a brand for people, so we needed to make sure that it was super accessible, which really meant that we had to do an incredibly kind of in-depth study into accessibility to not just like meet the standards of today, but also in a way like try and set a new standard. I'm really proud of where we got to with that. Across color, yeah, it's really important, but also across typography as well. So yeah, that was a really big thing. I'd say another challenge, if I was asked about one of the biggest challenges was like we are, you know, dealing with an organization that's been around for 20 plus years and building a brand for an organization which has that level of legacy is challenging because you have to find a balance between like getting the historical context in and making sure you protect that history, but at the same time making the brand kind of relevant for today. So I would say that was one of the things that was hard, but also I think we've got a really good balance now of like a nod to the kind of past, a nod to the pixel, but also a system that feels quite of today as well, and also has the flexibility to take on what's next and to be kind of relevant for culture today.
Lovely, nice. Yeah, if anyone has questions about if you have to be accessible and you have some sort of accessibility initiative, like definitely pop a question in. That's not the topic today, but we have some
Yeah.
experts here who can maybe speak to it a little bit, especially if you're coming at from like a branding side. That's really, really cool. And so zooming out a little bit of just like rebranding in general, I'm curious all of your thoughts on the role of flexibility and how it should play in a rebranding effort. Like, how early do you define it in the process? Is it from the very start? Is it something along the way you're like, maybe we should do this? I guess for people in the audience who are maybe thinking about having this flexible approach, how early should they define it in the process?
I mean, I think flexibility is essential to be, I mean, from a process standpoint, from a visual standpoint, from a strategic standpoint, flexibility is core to how we think about everything we do. I think um, one of the ways that we ensure flexibility is by having early conversations, right? So we understand what an organization is up against, what their challenges are. We also start to have those conversations around what's actually fixed in an organization. For example, for an organization like Mozilla, right, their mission and their principles are not changing. Those are enduring. Those are foundational. Those are really important, and they are some of those things that have built legacy and lore around them. So just by knowing what's fixed, then we can start to build out what's flex, right? Those are core, but how we tell the story around that mission and how we tell that story around Mozilla really was flexible. How our tone of voice might come to life. We have this tone of voice that's your brainy bestie. That's something that we developed over time. Even our sense of humor, that's something that we developed, and how that flexes, how that comes to life, all those things sort of happen over time. So it's like with any of this work, you put forward a hypothesis, right? Our visual hypothesis of these great bright colors that turned out through accessibility to not be so great for our audiences. Then you adapt. And so through each part of the process, from that initial idea to how it comes to life, you have to bake in that flexibility, and you have to think about all aspects for where you might start that core idea to where it might get its own legs and where it might start to flex on its own.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I also think, our brief was like a flexible ask from the beginning. So when we think about the process, like in a way, there wasn't a way that we could develop a brand that didn't have an amount of flexibility. I mentioned at the beginning, the breadth of our portfolio, the breadth of audiences, etc. We needed something that had the stretch in order to meet those different needs. And then I think in addition, you've got, I don't know. I would encourage people to think about what they need the brand to do, what isn't good when it doesn't have a level of flexibility. And so kicking off the project from the very beginning, thinking, oh, we are going to need some kind of system here that's going to answer our brief was really important.
Nice. Building on that a little bit with your model, the fixed flex free. You've talked about, maybe things that can start with the fix, but when you get to like the flex free, like how do you determine where elements fall in a given project? Is it like you said, like with the colors being more on the free side? Like I guess how do you the fix seems like a little bit easier. You kind of identify the core things, but once you get to the flex and free, how do you define? Maybe you could go into a little more detail on how you structure those two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. You go first, Luke. Go ahead.
After you.
I mean, I would just say that flex is increasingly important as all brand ecosystems expand and go across, everybody needs to be physical, everybody needs to be digital. Everybody has to have some kind of representation on social. Each one of
Yeah.
these mediums has its own requirements and native language to speak. And if you only are fixed in these ways, then you come off as super inorganic and you don't connect to the people you actually need to connect to. And so, you know, none of these things are exactly easy. On surface level, you might say, oh, okay, I recognize Mozilla for this, but going through the process and really defining that story and what these things mean, getting the kind of your fixed nailed down, then you can start to expand a little bit and get much more specific in terms of where that flex can be. So I like to think about it as it's like you're working your core, you're building your core muscles, and then everything else comes from there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think like the audience thing, as we've talked about, is obviously really important. I think another thing that helps me figure out which elements can be more flexed and which elements can be more free is also just what things are more timeless. So for example, a logo in an ideal world, if it does its job, it shouldn't need to change again, and therefore it's a fixed element. But when it comes to something like an illustration style or a photography style, these things have a bit more of a tendency to go in or out of fashion. It might be in a couple of years, something that looks really amazing today and cutting edge might feel not so much in a couple of years. So having a think about what are the things that, if you imagine there was another redesign in 10 years time, what are the things that you would want to stay? What are the things that you would accept changing a little bit? And then what are the things that actually you could imagine going to something new? So it's because of this aspect of your fixed elements are the things that should be really timeless and the things that are identifiable as a brand. There's also an aspect of your most flexible elements should be the ones that you're almost least attached to over time, because they're not defining your brand in the same way that your fixed elements are.
And I might build on that too, just to say that it doesn't all come from us, right? A lot of times we really do lean on research to tell us what are our equities, what is resonating, what isn't working for us. We may have assumptions of what stands out in the Mozilla brand identity, but then when we test with users, we might learn that, oh, actually that thing that we knew, we recognize, we associate is something that we need to build on or kind of define in a way that so it can be more resonant with the people that we're talking to. So a lot of it comes from hearing from the people that we're trying to talk to first.
Yeah. Nice. Thank you all. I think we've been seeing kind of the benefits of here. We see it makes so much sense to have this system, especially for a brand like Mozilla. I think you've laid that out very clearly. But maybe some people are watching this and they're like, well, I don't work at a brand like Mozilla. We're not that flexible. I don't know if we could be that flexible. So I'm curious, maybe, have you seen instances where an overly flexible brand system maybe backfired, or like the risk of doing this, if any, if you could share?
Yeah, I think the really key thing is you have to have a reason to flex. And if you don't have a model that you're flexing along, then it can just become a situation where every asset shows up in a different way and there's no rhyme or reason. So as we've said a lot, like government to grassroots here, but it could be, internal versus external audiences. It could be product brand versus parent brand. There has to be some kind of reason to build that flex into the system. And if you don't do that, then you can just end up just showing up in very, very different ways. The other risks are you can lose too much of the core identity. So you need to make sure that those fixed assets have enough presence throughout. And if you look at our system, you will see, although there's lots of flex, you will always see our logo. You will tend to see a bit of that core green. And you have to be clear in terms of how much of that core identity shows up and where. But another thing that can be a risk is if you don't consider the full needs of the system and build flexing in the right places, that's when you start to get that nightmare scenario that a lot of us have been in as a brand designer, where you set the system up and suddenly things start coming back looking different. And the reason someone will say is because it's like, oh, you only said I can have 3 lines of text here and I need more. So there's a real mix, I think, of having that centralized governance to make sure that it doesn't completely go off track, but at the same time, building enough flexing from the beginning that allows people to do those different things. Because if you don't, people will start just making it up themselves. And I think that's something that's very familiar to us in design, right? Where you think you've set up a perfect system, it goes off and it comes back looking in ways you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, I think, Luke, you're talking here a bit about how important it is to bring in some level of guardianship to the brand. The more that you can tune and kind of nurture that brand, in a way, the better the results are. So we have our brand system assets on Frontify, and then we have, guidelines of how to use those elements on Frontify as well. Now, people are able to access that and go and use them, but we also see how important it is to consult with different teams using the brand, provide opportunities for people to come and share what they're doing, and basically make sure that we are keeping people kind of supported as they roll out the brand. And I think that is critical. I don't think it's as successful when you're like, there it is, off you go, and expect it always to work out perfectly. So I think bringing in some kind of element of guardianship, some kind of system where you can help to kind of support the brand getting out in the world is really critically important, especially when you're, rolling out a new brand or a rebrand. I think that's key. And we do that at Mozilla. We have those systems set up so that, anyone across the organization at the different corners of the organization can come to us and say, oh, we're using the system, we did this X, Y, and Z thing. Can you give us your point of view on it? And we can guide and steer and make sure that even though that system is super, flexible, that we are maintaining enough brand equity, whether that's something that's very like rigid and tight to our kind of more government end, or whether it's something that's more in the kind of grassroots end of things.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And we've had some questions here. I was going to get into, you kind of answered the next question anyways, getting into like implementation, how you ensure consistency. We've had a couple people provide questions. I'll just read them real quick, even though you sort of answered it, but just to show that other people have this on top of mind. What process do you have to roll this out across different departments and ensure consistency? Another person says, although this might be the same person, anonymous attendee, thank you for all the questions. In my previous role, we were known as the brand police because we'd be constantly pulling people up for incorrect usage of the brand and its assets. I would argue the brand was too rigid at the time, but with a brand built to flex, then they say, how do you manage that usage across a large organization? So I think you've talked to that a little bit. There's one question maybe we could add on to all of this, or if you want to add anything to those previous questions. But then they say, okay, now we have the concept, people are able to, we have the processes in place for them to use it. How do you, this question says, what tactics have you taken to understand how the brand has resonated? And so that, I guess, could be a couple different ways. Obviously, there's external, but also even internally, like how do you get a sense that the new brand is being adopted by these various, the government, the grassroots, internal employees, these people that you did this for?
Yeah, I mean, I can start off by saying, getting internal support for the brand is really important, because that support and that love for the brand internally helps it to permeate externally. So one of the things that we kind of committed to through the brand process was like socializing the brand, making sure that people were really aware of what was coming and felt that they saw themselves in that brand when it came out. And I know we were talking earlier about how important it was to bring different people in along the way. That wasn't like a purely kind of logistical thing. That was actually to ensure the success of the brand from the inside out. So I think that's one thing that I would really encourage people to do. Make sure that you feel people are seen and heard within the brand, because then it helps to be kind of successful out in the world. And then the second part I would say is, you know, it is really tricky to make sure that you can prove the success of a brand. Like, you know, we're asked all the time, you know, well, why would you do this? What are the success metrics? Like, what's the point? You know, and I think there's a few things that we looked at Mozilla, a few signals that we used in order to kind of say, okay, what do we, in an ideal world, when we look back in X number of years, want to see in terms of before and after. And Carolyn's first slide here today was this kind of landscape of, quite frankly, like all kinds of different look and feel kind of approaches across Mozilla. When we do that today, we see such a significant difference, which to me means that we've got this this system that's working now. We now see our distinctive assets showing up across our portfolio, and we're only on the early stages of rollout, so there's still a lot to go, but we can definitely see the impact of the system working across our portfolio, which helps to draw distinction to Mozilla, and it helps to convey our story as Mozilla, and it helps to kind of help people understand the different parts of the organization. And then another piece in terms of like success metrics, right, is brand equity. Mozilla's brand equity was pretty low when we started the brand work. And it's tricky because we don't actively market Mozilla. We're not putting like marketing dollars behind Mozilla. So it's tricky because with brand equity, you can put a lot of effort into marketing and you can see some spikes. So we're completely aware that brand equity is something that will kind of slowly move over time, but we're already seeing signals of positive improvement in brand equity purely because of how we are using our distinctive assets more kind of confidently across the different parts of the portfolio. So I think that again is a good way of like just looking and seeing how successful the system can be from a kind of starting point right through to kind of where you are now and what you want it to be in the future.
Great. That's a great answer. Thank you. We're going to zoom out a little further too to talk maybe more general rebranding, but real quick, someone asked this question. I think this is a great question. I think we all ask ourselves this question whenever we finish a big project. And I think you can get a lot of insights here, but would you do anything differently throughout the process? Something that maybe someone could take and learn and apply in their own rebrand or project that they're working on?
Gosh, that's a great question.
It's a tough one.
I can, do you want to go, Carolyn, or I can go?
I was just going to joke and say no.
Exactly. It was perfect.
Exactly.
Flawless, always. No, go ahead.
I mean, Luke mentioned the colors that we, we really wanted this very vibrant, kind of quite modern feeling color palette as like step one of the color journey. And I think in hindsight, now knowing the accessibility journey we went on, we might have been a little bit more, I guess, sensitive to that early color palette choice. That's one thing. And it's, nothing was lost through that, but there was a process that was needed in order to go back and look at that color palette and really interrogate it from an accessibility standpoint. And I just think in hindsight, I would now probably be much more thoughtful about the difference between getting excited about colors versus the reality of what we needed to do. So I think that's one thing for me, I would say. That's very much like a system answer, like a brand system answer. From the process side of things, I have to say, like we planned this brand project very, very carefully in order to kind of foresee all kinds of different challenges, knowing that we had all this context we were working with, like the history of Mozilla, the complexity of the portfolio, the kind of minimal understanding of Mozilla, etc. So we went into this very kind of cautious of being, very thoughtful about the process. And that I'm really proud of. And so I wouldn't have changed that. And I would love to kind of share any details with that with anyone, because I think it's been successful in that we've managed to build this system that's now working across the organization. But yeah, there's been a few little things along the way that, you know, might have rethought, I guess.
Yeah, I completely agree with Amy's point, and I think especially around color, there were a few things that we were very excited about in the early days of the redesign, and I think from my perspective, I definitely felt like we were 90% done when we were probably about 70% done. And that process of when we started to build out the guidelines, build out how it's actually going to work across absolutely everything, to me, I think we moved a little bit quickly in that moment, looking back, and we definitely ended up taking a bit of a step back and redoing and rebuilding some parts of that system. So a big one for me is don't underestimate the importance of the guidelines as part of the overall process, because quite often, and I've been guilty of this in the past, you can think, oh, I'll design it and then we'll put a guidelines together in a couple of weeks and it's job done. Whereas actually what was really interesting in this was the guidelines and the accessibility testing was around the same time, and there were lots and lots of discoveries in that process, and we ended up really extending out the period that we spent on those things, and the system massively benefited for it. So that was a big learning for me, was put more time into that piece that you can kind of think is the end of the creativity. It's actually really not, because you will learn things and you will have to fix serious challenges along the way that will change how it feels. So yeah, I think I slightly wish I'd been a bit more aware of that and a bit more up for that, I think, when some of those changes were happening.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Next question I have, we have a few more too in the audience that we'll get to. I just wanted to ask this one. Luke, you had mentioned earlier, like thinking, oh, 10 years, what's going to be the new trend and how will you flex or, adjust to that? I'm curious, we see brands engaging with memes, microcultures, different social trends. How do you all ensure brand expression stays authentic and not just reactive, trying to follow the trend?
Yeah, this was really, really important for Mozilla, especially. Like, I think unique to Mozilla out of everyone we've ever worked with, they're so born of the internet. They are made of the fabric of the internet, and they're part of the fabric of the internet, which is amazing. So it was really, really important to us that we made something that was native to that everyone could see themselves in. For us, that really affected all of the assets across Fix to Flex and everything in terms of the overall aesthetic and feeling. And what we really wanted to do when it came to that Flex end was make assets that were flexible, but that were also accessible and easy to play with. So our grassroots end is deliberately quite chunky. It's quite simple. It's quite playful. And we've got some tools in there that really anyone can use to an extent. So our pixel art style is very, very, very simple, and you can play around with that and create something quite easily. Our font is free to download and you can play with it, and it's got little secret characters in it, like you can type a certain string and get Zilla roaring in there and all of those. So by creating a brand that invites people to play with it, I think you then avoid people creating random stuff that doesn't feel relevant, because everybody working on a brand wants to impart a little bit of their own personality. They want to put themselves into their design work. If you don't give them the tools to do that, they will end up doing random internet stuff, as you say. Like, you end up losing the soul of the brand because people want to do whatever's in the moment. Whereas if you give them enough that is easy to use and that they have permission to use, you can really avoid that pitfall, because people are able to do it through the brand rather than doing it through other assets or through whatever they feel like using on the day. So governance is a huge part of it, but another huge part of it is making things that people want to play with and that they can play with, so that they can express themselves without resorting to kind of off-brand expressions.
Great answer. Anyone else have anything to add, or I think Luke, you might have nailed.
Yeah,
Okay.
he did. I mean, I think from a storytelling perspective too, we think about um just what's going to be authentic to who you are, right? With at JKR, our ethos is be distinctive, and we always refer back to this Oscar Wilde quote of "Be yourself, everyone else is taken." And so, when it comes to showing up online, when comes to participating and reacting and having a conversation with the people that we're trying to serve, it just goes back to: is this actually authentic to the story that Mozilla is trying to tell? So it's not, well, we're born of the internet. We're not talking about everything and everyone on the internet. We're talking about, what makes a healthy internet. And so that sort of starts to shape the story that we tell. And that makes it more about our authentic right to have that conversation versus just any internet conversation.
Totally. And I think, Karen, you're starting to talk as well about, the behavior of a brand, which is, as important as anything else. Like the attitude, the stance, the point of view that a brand has can be as valuable as the identity. And I think something like Mozilla, for example, like, hopefully you can see and feel that attitude and that behavior in the brand system now. And I think that feels timeless. We have a manifesto that's been around since the beginning, and like the work that we have is grounded in that manifesto. There's no intention that the behavior of the brand will change, even if the kind of culture around us changes. We still have that core kind of behavioral intent from the brand, which kind of comes through in the way that it shows up.
Yeah, there's a really good, slightly adjacent point in there about a lot of brands, especially huge brands that have been around for a while, that they will already have fixed assets. And I think at JKR, when Mozilla came in, we wouldn't have dreamed of changing that manifesto and that approach. Like we did some work to sort of express it, but at the same time, you kind of have to respect the fixed things that an organization already has and kind of amplify them rather than try and kind of throw away and bring in new fixed assets of your own. And that's a really good example. That manifesto was a real source of inspiration for all of us.
Nice. There was one little question just to clarify. I don't know, Amy, you can add to this. They said you haven't done any marketing you said you haven't done any marketing for the brand. Is that intentional or is there a plan to promote it? Is that?
So yeah, that's a great question. When I say marketing, I'm talking about paid marketing. We see Mozilla as, and in the simplest possible way of explaining it, like as the parent brand to this organization. The Mozilla brand system was developed to be the kind of parent brand across actually quite a complex portfolio, which I've spoken to already. Within that portfolio, we have different marketing initiatives. Some of those are paid, some of those are, earned, but we don't put dollars behind marketing Mozilla as such. What we do is try and support the values that Mozilla has being seen and felt through the things that we do market. So let's take Firefox, for example, which we do market because it's a consumer product. The important thing there is that Firefox is what it is and is a great product because it has the Mozilla values within it. So, the other bits of the portfolio that we are starting to kind of roll the brand out across have that feeling of Mozilla that we were talking about. They hold the distinctive assets. They show up in different ways. Some of them are, at events, for example, or we have different initiatives and programs, but it's more organic in a way. So we're not putting dollars behind. We're not having an obvious return on investment kind of signal that we're getting from Mozilla, but we are across other bits of the portfolio, especially when it comes to kind of more consumer side of things.
Nice. And I'm curious too with this flexibility, is it something a brand, I'm thinking of someone here listening saying, oh, this is cool. I want to go do this right now. We're going to set this up. Is this something you kind of earn it over time, or is it something you launch from day one? How are you evolving it over time? I'm assuming it evolves, but just to get your experience and thoughts.
Sorry, Chris, was the question around the brand system?
Yeah, like the brand system, yeah, we can keep it to the brand system. Yeah, how do you evolve it over time? Or
Yeah,
does it
I
need
mean,
to launch from day one? Like, here it is, these flexible elements, this is it. Or are you
yeah, yeah.
adjusting?
Yeah, I can answer that, and I'm sure the others will have a perspective on this as well. I think it's near impossible to on day one launch the brand and be like, this is the whole thing done. You know, flick a switch and the entire system is rolled out in every single area you want it to be rolled out. I think having this attitude that actually, you know, you do need to kind of nurture the brand. You know, it is really important. It kind of, you know, an analogy like it's just, you know, you kind of plant that seed at the very beginning of the launch, and then it's really important to continue to kind of like help it grow. And I think you can do that through many ways. Of course, there's you know, there's the socialization and there's helping to people to understand the brand. But as you assess how the brand is landing in the world, are there any elements that you need to, you know, drill into, take another look at, create more flexibility? An example for us is we recognize quite quickly that actually our icons, for example, were too limiting. So we've done an additional project there to extend the iconography. When we think about photography, we're like, okay, we launched the brand with some notional examples of photography, but then what's next? Do we want to build a more extensive photographic library? So you can kind of plug in additional pieces to help extend the system and extend the way in which the brand can show up in the world. And I think you have to do that by getting a read of how it's landing and where you're finding that there's maybe limitations to what the brand can do. So I think it's totally fine to launch and say, like, this is our kind of starter for 10, as it were. We've developed a framework and a strategy for a system, and we intend to build it from there. And I think if you have confidence that you've got that rigor from day one, then you have the guidelines and you have the substance there to just build on it and make sure that you're developing the brand in a way that feels right and authentic to what you intend to do.
Completely.
Go on.
Go ahead. No, you go.
I was going to say, Amy's absolutely right in terms of it's very, very rare for a brand to land on day one and be like this, chiseled into granite and never change. And even before I ever thought about things in this fixed, flexed, free framework, I would work on brands. I'm sure many people listening have worked on brands where, yeah, it just gradually changes over time. I think the great thing about the framework is, in a way, it reflects some of those things that you would want to do anyway, but it just ensures that you can do them in a way that's mindful, so that you know that when you're fixing or when you're flexing an element, you've labeled it, you've thought about it properly, and you're doing it with a sense of purpose and to solve a specific problem. That if you don't do that, it's very likely that your brand will evolve over time anyway, and it might evolve in directions that you don't like. And that's why we really like that framework, so that you can just be mindful about it and you can make sure that the changes you're making over time are making you stronger, rather than just gradually diluting your equity, which is quite often the risk if you're not careful about these things.
And I think everybody's answered this very thoroughly, but it is good just to reiterate that it's any brand launch is a marathon versus a sprint. And when you're thinking about how a brand shows up, it is so dependent on where it is in its life cycle, how much education you need to do, how much you need to really embed an idea, a system in. That might be a period where there is less flex by nature because you're doing a lot more of the establishment. As that brand gets more mature and as it's associated and it's people know how to use it, know what the rules are, kind of learn a little bit of the melody, then you get more of that sense of play. With Mozilla, the kind of magic of that identity is there was already elements baked in that people could play with in day one. The system was so strong that we were able to both do some embedding, but also give that license to play kind of earlier in the process than is typical. So
Some really good points.
Someone just jumped in here, which is just to add on to it, and I think this could be a quick answer. But to Amy's point, our rebrand has launched a minimal viable product, which will evolve. Can we insert the fixed free flex at this stage? I see why not, right?
I don't see why not. Yeah. Work out what your distinctive assets are. Start with those being your fixed, and then assess what's needed in terms of more flexibility and freedom that the system needs. I think auditing what you have is really important, but if you've got that distinction in your kind of core elements, then just build from there, and assess what you need in terms of flex of the system. Yeah, why not? You don't always need to do an entire rebrand, you know, you can also take what you have and build from there.
We are at the final few minutes here. If we didn't get to your question, we can follow up via email. There's a few that I don't think we got to all of them. I also just want to thank all of you, Carolyn, Luke, Amy. The work is so great. Like it's just such a great job you did with this. Again, it was so fun to go through and look at all the little details and all the thought that went into it. I think it's like so inspiring for anyone who's working on a brand and gets excited about these things. I'm curious, just like a little takeaway for everyone. I love to end on a takeaway. If there's just one thing that, even if you just want to repeat it from something we talked about today, it's just something that you think you'd really want to repeat for people that like it really stands out to you about this amazing project that you all worked on. If you have one.
I'm happy to start. I would honestly say stay open-minded and be curious through the process, because it doesn't always work out how you plan it to go. And you really don't know how people are going to respond, either internally and externally. So the more open-minded and the more curious you can be to people's perspectives, their feedback, their input, I think the stronger you build a brand. Because I mentioned earlier, make sure people have felt within that brand. And I think you can do that by making sure that you're really open to hearing people's perspectives as you build something, especially when people are so passionate about things like brand. They want to feel like they've got a place in there and a perspective. So I just say, stay open-minded, stay curious, listen to the questions. And yeah, that would be my main takeaway.
I think mine's similar. And building on that is really just test and iterate. I think, and there are lots of different ways to test. You can some of it's informal, sharing amongst each other, and some of it is more formal, like getting user feedback, getting feedback from government, who are your power users, and getting their perspective on it, so that way you can adapt and build, and it becomes less of a subjective decision and more of learning from different inputs that you're making the right steps.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the openness and the curiosity. I think for me, it's so important that you understand who you're designing for. So like see as much of the existing brand as you possibly can, learn as much as you can about who the different audiences are that need to use it, what are their pain points and things like that. And if you are thinking of creating a fixed flex system, just try and understand what is the reason for building that flexibility. So in the case of Mozilla, government to grassroots, it's incredibly unique to Mozilla's challenges. But equally, I've worked on many brands that have different reasons to flex. And I think it's only by really understanding your organization's needs and their audiences that you can start to think about, okay, in what spaces are we going to flex this brand and who for and why?
Amazing. That's a perfect way to end here, everyone. We're right at time. Amy, Luke, Carolyn, thank you so much. This was just packed with information and inspiration. So I hope all of you watching feel the same way. Feel free to follow them on LinkedIn, see what they're working on. And yeah, thank you to everyone who joined. As a reminder, we're going to send you a follow-up email with the recording. If you're interested in the other episodes, again, we have 6 of these. This is one of 6. Take a look at our website or our newsletter. And if you're interested in learning more about Frontify, you can visit our website at frontify.com. But everyone, thank you again. It was a great session, and I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Thanks for having us. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.